Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Welcome back to my second 2020 NFL mock draft of the season. My first one was published on Halloween, so naturally it made sense for me to publish the second one on Thanksgiving, and you guessed it, the third one will probably be coming out sometime around Christmas. If this is your first time seeing one of my mock drafts, thank you so much for clicking. If you like what you see, you should hit that subscribe button with the bell notification and stick around and see what else I've got in store for us for the rest of the NFL season and then the off season, which is where I really get busy. The goal for this video is 1,000 likes by the end of Black Friday. If we can hit 1,000 likes by then, that'll ensure that YouTube looks at this mock draft and says, hey, this one's actually not too bad. Let's go ahead and show this to some other people. You guys don't understand how much that helps this channel grow and how much I appreciate it. And because it's Thanksgiving, I would be hella thankful if we were able to accomplish that this week.
I'm thankful. I'm thankful. I'm thankful. I'm thankful.
For me with these mock drafts, I try to make each one a little different than the last based on the different scenarios that you could possibly see at the top of the draft. My last mock draft actually already got shredded because I tried to use predictive standings instead of the current standings. These mock drafts, each individual pick is like a domino, and moving one can change every single pick thereafter. Plus, wouldn't it be boring and a waste of everyone's time to make them all the same? As always, I'm never going to try and claim that I know everything about every team, but hopefully with your constructive feedback in the comments, we can educate and inform everyone of potential team needs or draft tendencies heading into the NFL draft season. And if you hear any juicy rumors about trades or free agency and how that might affect the draft, throw that in the comments too. If you're not satisfied with a pick for your team, then I highly recommend going back and watching the other mock drafts that I've done, because I may have already posted another scenario that you would prefer. Obviously, these mock drafts are hardly ever right, but the art of team building is fun to speculate, and one of my favorite things personally about professional sports, because I love how one draft can completely change your team for the next decade. For example, look at the Raiders and how they're set up for a lot of future success based on really nailing this draft that they had this year. But enough small talk and disclaimers. Let me know in the comments who you think is missing from this 2020 NFL mock draft, and who do you think fell in this draft, and where would you like to see them go instead of where I have them. Cue the intro. I was really looking forward to the draft debate between Joe Burrow and Tua Tagovailoa, but after Joe Burrow showed out in T-Town like that, and then with the question marks about Tua's health getting reinforced with a potentially degenerative injury to his hip, this one feels pretty easy right now. But I'm going to do a mock where Chase Young is the #1 overall pick, because I'm not sold on this being a sure bet just yet, because the Bengals aren't in position to be passing up on elite local pass rushers, which to be honest feel harder to find these days than quarterbacks anyways. This organization has been pretty predictable, and they don't hide their intentions very well. So we're going to know pretty early on if they're locked in on Joe Burrow or if Chase Young is in the running for the #1 overall pick. I think back to the last time the Bengals had the #1 overall pick and they selected Carson Palmer out of USC, who honestly is a similar quality college quarterback prospect based on their arm, the confidence that they emit, and their surrounding talent. I think the Bengals could skip on quarterback at #1 because there's so many Andy Dalton level prospects that will be available at the top of the second round, and you hired this coach because you believe in his ability to work with quarterbacks within a system. Why spend #1 overalls on a quarterback if there's potential for them to regress like Jared Goff? The Giants are pretty fortunate the Redskins were still trying to win games, and Chase Young just fell right into their lap. Chase Young is the best player in the draft at the position of their greatest need. There's no greater slam dunk in the 2020 NFL draft than Chase Young to the New York Giants. Let's see if they screw this up and win some more games down the stretch. The Dolphins do come into town week 15, and that might end up as the unofficial Chase Young Bowl. Everybody expects Tua to be the pick here at #3, but the NFL doesn't use top 10 picks on guys with injury questions quite like this hip that Tua is working with, on top of the already bad ankles. If the draft fell this way, in this order, the Dolphins could take whichever guy the Giants don't take in a best player approach. After trading Laramie Tunsil, it seems weird to spend such a high pick on another offensive tackle, but you've got to be able to protect whomever it is that ends up as the starting quarterback. Georgia offensive tackle Andrew Thomas is just as good of a prospect, if not more consistent, than Laramie Tunsil, and he's younger, so assuming he pans out, you won't have to re-sign him for 5 more years, whereas Tunsil's going to need a new deal before the 2021 season, and anytime you can get 2 first rounders for an offensive lineman, go ahead and do it. With Trent Williams halfway out the door already, this team is going to need more help along the offensive line. By beating the Detroit Lions, the Redskins have potentially played themselves out of a position for the best prospect in the draft and possibly the best offensive lineman in the 2020 draft class too. Iowa's Tristan Wirfs isn't too far behind as a prospect, but whoever it is, I feel sorry for them, as well as the guy that has to take over as head coach for this franchise. It's actually not that bad of a roster. I just don't know if anyone will ever be able to overcome the internal dysfunction that just permeates out of Dan Snyder. The Broncos are a messily built team. Is that right? Built messily? The roster's a mess, and they could go in an array of directions, but I'm giving them the best player available in defensive tackle, Derrick Brown. Derrick Brown could have been a first rounder last year, but chose to come back, and I think it's going to pay off for him because he's just been a beast this year, and I think that in the Vic Fangio defense, he could be the Akeem Hicks. Just an all-around, run-stuffing, pocket-collapsing, interior defensive lineman. If the Falcons aren't careful, they're going to play themselves out of at least 10 draft spots with a turnaround at the end of the season. If they're keeping the coaching staff intact here, AJ Epinesa is the pick because he fits the scheme so well, playing opposite of Takk McKinley. The Lions defense is still a mess, even though they spent a lot of resources last offseason towards improving it. I think with this unit, what you're really lacking is an every down linebacker, and not often is a linebacker worthy of a top 10 pick, but Isaiah Simmons is a next generation type of linebacker that would never leave the field. Depending on what happens with Matthew Stafford, this pick could change eventually into Justin Herbert. If Stafford has in fact had multiple fractures in his back over the last 2 seasons, it might be time for his own good to just hang him up. In this scenario, 2 offensive linemen have already been selected, so I'm going to go with the cute pick here and reunite Kyler Murray with his Oklahoma wide receiver CeeDee Lamb. Larry Fitzgerald can't go on forever, and we still don't know enough about Akeem Butler to bank on him developing into your number 1 wide receiver. Christian Kirk and Andy Isabella are great complementary slot wide receivers, but CeeDee Lamb not only fills a need, but he already comes with chemistry and rapport with your starting quarterback. To me, Jerry Jeudy is the clear-cut number 1 wide receiver in this draft. Hands down, he is the future prototype of what you want an NFL wide receiver to look like. But the Cardinals made sweeping changes to their organization and then made moves after that based off of familiarity and comfort working with one another. And that would be Cliff Kingsbury working with Kyler Murray, having that confidence to say months before it was even a real life scenario that he would take him with the number 1 overall draft pick if he had an opportunity to do so. By some miracle of fate, that came to fruition. And for that reason, I could see Kyler going to bat for CeeDee Lamb and helping him get selected by the Cardinals over Jerry Jeudy. Now, this all depends on measurables. I'm concerned that CeeDee Lamb actually is not going to be fast enough in the NFL to be better than Jerry Jeudy, but will be interesting to pay attention to at the NFL Combine. It's going to be easy to mock a cornerback to the Jaguars this year. After trading Jalen Ramsey, they have an all-pro sized hole at cornerback. They've got 2 first-round picks, and this is a very deep cornerback class. With that said, I could see them passing with their first of 2 first-rounders to grab a player of value before they fall out of the top 10. That player this year could end up being Grant Delpit. The negative stigma that seems to be following Grant Delpit around this year is that he can't tackle. I'm going to call BS on that and say that the struggles he's had with his tackling are due partially from being injuries and partially a business decision. Look, he could have been a top pick in last year's draft, but he had to come back for another year to gain eligibility. When you start dealing with injuries, your mortality becomes that much more apparent, and seeing what can happen to your draft stock with an injury would make anyone question their decision every time they go in to make a tackle. Now, he could have gotten injured and said, you know what, I'm going to shut it down and start prepping for the NFL draft. He would have been a top 10 pick with everybody focused on last year's film, but he's got a chance at a national championship, and he's out there trying to do his thing and help his team. I think that Grant Delpit is going to be one of the best players in this draft class. Mock drafters are going to be really annoyed with the Jets moving out of the top 5 because they've become a much more difficult team to pick for without one of the top 2 offensive tackles still on the board. This looks like it'll be a deep offensive tackle class though, so they should be able to still get their guy at some point to provide some consistency for Sam Darnold. But I didn't want to reach for the sake of this mock draft. Let's go ahead and get this guy some more consistent weapons because it's unknown if Robbie Anderson will even be back in 2020. And you could agree that CeeDee Lamb would not be taken above Jerry Jeudy like I have in this scenario. But if 2 wide receivers are going in the top 10, I think it's safe to say that the early bets are going to be Jeudy and Lamb as the top 2 wide receivers taken. And these are 2 teams in the top 10 that should be and could be very interested in acquiring one of the game changers on the outside. If the Jets keep on winning, Henry Ruggs III is another great option, the other Alabama wide receiver, and I think would fill that Robbie Anderson hole as a deep threat a lot better than a guy like CeeDee Lamb, who's a little bit too close to just being a more explosive Quincy Enunwa to me. Phillip Rivers is washed up, his contract's expiring, and he's got way too many damn kids to be spending half the year away from them. I was hoping to see a lot more development from Justin Herbert in his senior year, but if drafted by the Chargers, he provided them a future while they give Tyrod Taylor a chance to compete with this veteran squad that really seemed like they were not that far away from a Super Bowl in 2018. When assessing the Bucs quarterback position, everyone agrees that the Bucs, they could probably do better. But they're in an abusive relationship with Jameis Winston, and they've been going to extreme lengths to avoid speaking negatively about Jameis, making excuses for him. I think that they try and get Jameis Winston back on a 2-year prove-it deal that is cheaper than a franchise tag and also allows them to get out of it after 1 year if necessary. And then if it's just more of the same in 2020, build up the roster for Trevor Lawrence the next year. Same as with the Jets though, if the top 2 offensive linemen hadn't gone so early on, then that would probably be the move here. But there is still a need in the secondary with this pass heavy division, and Jeffrey Okudah is a #1 cornerback that would actually complement last year's 2nd round pick Sean Bunting really well and give them 2 different style of corners to really match up the different types of receivers in this division. The Carson Wentz excuses are going from being diffused by, oh, it's just a long recovery from an injury, to legitimate concern for his future as a starting quarterback in the NFL, at least with the Eagles, I think. This front office, they've got their work cut out for them. The Alshon Jeffrey situation probably has a lot to do with the lack of confidence in Carson Wentz, and replacing him with a big target like T. Higgins would go a long way into reestablishing himself as the leader of this football team, because right now, Carson Wentz is not the alpha dog in that locker room. So I think if the Eagles want this to work out, first of all, they need to work on getting him back to the basics and fundamentals, because he's just playing really sloppily right now, but also clearing out that locker room of anybody that would question Carson Wentz and his ability to lead this football team. Until then, the ghost of Big Dick Nick Foles will continue to haunt this team. The Raiders have multiple 1st round picks, and John Gruden is somewhat of a wide receiver connoisseur. I think he's going to want to use at least one of their first 2 picks to get his guy. Obviously, Antonio Brown was supposed to be that guy, and if they could find a guy with a similar skill set in this draft, I think that Henry Ruggs has got speed for days and potential to really develop into a great route runner, which would be a great complement to Tyrell Williams. For the Browns, I'm afraid you can't draft a new head coach, but it is no secret the Browns' offensive line has also been holding them back this year. The 2020 draft is predictably full of Alabama players, and Jedrick Willis is a fast riser as the top player along this offensive line. The Panthers' approach to the 2020 NFL Draft all depends on what happens with Cam Newton. I'm making the assumption that either Cam gets 1 more season, or the Panthers try to plug a veteran cast-off as a band-aid for the time being, because this veteran team is not ready to start over with a rookie quarterback just yet. Worst case scenario, Kyle Allen continues to be your starting quarterback in 2020. But what was once a strength of this team is now somewhat of an aging unit, and with the transition to more of a hybrid 3-4 defense, the interior of the defensive line needs to continue to be a strength. Javon Kinlaw is a local product that is fast rising up draft boards and would allow the Panthers to move on from Gerald McCoy eventually. While the Raiders' offensive line has been much improved this year, it's a unit that is aging quickly from the inside out and will need to add a bit more youth to replace Richie Incognito as early as 2020 while preparing for Father Time to hit Rodney Hudson and Gabe Jackson. The Raiders' 2019 draft class has been a huge hit so far, so taking a guy like Alex Leatherwood would be a luxury pick that this front office has afforded themselves. Justin Houston was a nice pickup in free agency, but injuries have been an issue with him for quite some time, which is also why the Chiefs released him in the first place. So you can't bank on him providing a consistent pass rush for many more years. And even though the Colts added pass rusher Ben Benogu in the draft last year, he's almost more of a linebacker hybrid, and he'd be better suited in a rotation with more of an every down rusher like Penn State's Yetur Gross-Matos. I wanted to give them a real defensive tackle, but their interior defensive line is actually loaded with converted defensive ends that really wouldn't provide you much of a speed rush if moved back outside, and that's what this defense really needs, is just more speed at all the right places. Despite Ryan Tannehill giving them a jolt in the passing game, the Titans are going to be a defensive-minded team. Jeffrey Simmons was a great value pick last year, and it looks like the interior defensive line is set, and while Harold Landry is having a breakout season, the Titans should add another edge rusher to play across from him, because relying on Cameron Wake for another 2 seasons just seems like a bad idea, especially after finishing his year on IR. Notre Dame's Julian Okwara is the best 3-4 edge rusher in this draft class. After addressing the safety position with their other first-round pick, the Jaguars can now solidify their secondary with a Jalen Ramsey replacement. Paulson Adebo has a game like Ramsey without all the extra icing on top. The Cowboys roster is actually in pretty good shape other than their safety position, but to avoid getting too stale or predictable with these mock draft picks, another position that could potentially need to be addressed this offseason is cornerback. Byron Jones, Anthony Brown, those guys are both free agents, and Chidobe Awuzie is every opposing quarterback's favorite target on this defense. What's crazy is the best overall cornerback on this roster probably is the guy that doesn't even get to play that much because he's allegedly, quote, not an ideal scheme fit, unquote, and that's Jordan Lewis. And who knows what the defensive scheme is really going to be when Lincoln Riley takes over next year, but Christian Fulton is the type of cornerback that will fit any scheme. This will probably be one of the more controversial parts of this mock draft, just because we really don't know the severity or the timeline for recovery yet with Tua Tagovailoa. If you watch my last mock draft, you know that I'm one of the biggest Tua fans out there, but NFL teams are extremely hesitant when it comes to injuries, especially ones that are possibly degenerative, meaning they're not going to get better, they only could potentially get worse. If the Dolphins screw this quarterback position up, their tank job will have been mostly a waste. Josh Rosen does allow them to be patient and careful because they've got him under contract for 2 more years and possibly a third if they exercise the 5th-year option on his contract. The injury to Tua really shows you how smart it was to trade for Rosen because there are no guarantees in this process, and I actually think that Tua falls even farther than this, but this is me playing it safe, and if somehow, God willing, Tua makes a full recovery and is able to go through pre-draft workouts and impress GMs, then by all means take him in the top 5 and swap out this pick here with whatever the top offensive lineman is on their board. I would love to see the Chiefs add a legitimate running back to this offense in the first round. Imagine adding the speed of Clemson's Travis Etienne out of the backfield with Tyreek Hill and Mecole Hardman on the outsides. I mean, we're talking about a straight up Madden offense, but I'm pretty sure that a late round draft pick could come in and produce in this offense, and the Chiefs have a real need at corner. Bryce Hall from UVA would be a great value for them late in the first round, and is a guy that scouts were raving about last year and expected him to come out into the draft, but he chose to return for his senior year and suffered a season-ending injury. It's amazing how a consistent running game has hidden a lot of the Vikings' offensive line issues, but when a team decides that they're not going to allow Dalvin Cook to beat them, you're going to need to provide Kirk Cousins with a clean pocket. The TCU left tackle, Lucas Niang, reminds me of Bryant McKinney with his size and athleticism combo, but most importantly without the love boat. And the Dolphins are on the clock again, and there's just so many possible scenarios here. I really do want to knock out a bunch of Dolphins mock drafts to see how many different ways they can go. In this mock draft scenario, I have them going all in on offense with the 3rd of their trio of first rounders, adding Wisconsin center Tyler Badash to really shore up the offensive line for Tua so that we can just keep this guy healthy. The Bills definitely need more weapons at wide receiver for their franchise quarterback. This pick didn't change from the last mock, and that's because it just makes so much sense for them based on need and projection of the draft slotting and just overall offensive fit. Packers' offensive tackles are aging, and you see how much differently their offense functions when Aaron Rodgers is getting knocked around. Let's get the GOAT a Prince for some protection during the final years of his career. The Seattle Seahawks are another team with an elite quarterback and just not enough pass protection. Russell Wilson's one of the best deep ball throwers in the league, so imagine if he actually had time for those routes to develop consistently. I haven't seen too much of Austin Jackson at USC, but I'm hearing a lot of good things and that he is a rising prospect to keep an eye on throughout this draft process. This Saints pick is going to be based on the scenario where Drew Brees retires and Teddy Bridgewater is brought back as the starting quarterback. When Teddy was the starting quarterback for the Saints this year, they were a defensive-minded team, and I would assume that they would return to a ball control style offense. They could potentially add a wide receiver here since only Michael Thomas, Traquan Smith, and Deontay Harris are currently under contract for next year. But that just didn't seem like their style right here, right now, and I'm leaning more towards them reinforcing that defense to keep it a strength. Sheldon Rankins will be playing under the 5th-year option next year, and based off his 4 years in the league so far, there is a 50-50 chance that he'll play all 16 games. When the Saints selected Sheldon Rankins, he wasn't particularly a need at the time, but was the best player available. Drafting Raekwon Davis at this point would be a pretty similar move for them at the end of the first round, and would actually fit really nicely next to Rankins along the interior of their defensive line. Matthew Judon is the Ravens' only legit pass rusher, and they're either going to have to pay him this offseason or let him walk in free agency. I think they're going to have to pay him because their pass rush hasn't even really been that great with Judon, but I don't even see how this defense can function without him. But even if they break the bank to keep him around, the Ravens are still going to need to draft a guy in May, and LSU's Clavon Chason feels like such an Ozzie Newsome type of pick by snagging the raw athletic freak late in the first round and watch him go on to be one of the best pass rushers in the class. All right, you guys asked for it, so here it is. Jalen Hurts is in the first round, and what better place to land than with the New England Patriots to take over for Tom Brady whenever he decides to finally retire. Assuming that Josh McDaniels is going to have a large input in picking Tom Brady's successor, it's important to remember that he was the only reason that Tim Tebow was a first round pick. And I remember McDaniels saying after the draft that it was mostly the intangibles like his leadership, work ethic, those things that made McDaniels believe in Tebow and envision him having success at the next level with the proper coaching and molding. I think that Jalen Hurts fits into that same mold with maybe a calmer and more stoic manner about him. I actually really like Jalen Hurts as a player. Seems like an ideal teammate, and the NFL is definitely a friendlier place for mobile quarterbacks these days. Everybody's going to be looking for the next Patrick Mahomes or Lamar Jackson, and I'm all about the mobile quarterback renaissance in the NFL, but I don't think that Jalen Hurts has the NFL arm that those guys have. They have cannons for arms that are also paired with a deep threat speed receiver that keeps the defense honest when trying to slow them down. That doesn't mean that Jalen Hurts can't succeed in the NFL, but I wouldn't expect instant impact with him, and it could be that his arm just never develops to be strong enough for the NFL. And we close this Thanksgiving mock draft with the 49ers finding a successor of their own. No, not for the quarterback. No, this team needs a successor for longtime 49er Joe Staley. Alaric Johnson, another Iowa offensive tackle, he might end up being a guard in the NFL, especially if he was drafted into a Shanahan system, but he's got over 2 college seasons worth of starts at left tackle. He started this year off with a knee injury, but has come back with a vengeance and is climbing his way into the first round. For the 49ers, he could be an instant starter at guard while grooming him to potentially take over for Joe Staley the following year outside at tackle. If Joe Staley either retires or the front office is more concerned about his long-term health and availability throughout the season next year, Auburn offensive tackle Jack Driscoll might be a better zone blocking left tackle, but he doesn't offer the interior flexibility for a win now roster because he's a little small and not quite as strong as a guy like Alaric Johnson. That's going to do it for my second mock draft of the year, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much for liking, commenting, subscribing. Good luck to everybody's football teams for the rest of the season. I hope you have a great Thanksgiving, a happy Thanksgiving, sharing it with the 4 major Fs: friends, family, football, and fun. I guess that's the 4th one. I am very thankful and always grateful for those of you that stick to the end of the video. Make sure you're following along with my weekly pick'em videos and playoff predictions, and I will see you all in the next video.
Thank you.